So today we're going to be discussing one of my favorite games of all times. That is Battletech. Battletech is certainly an animal of its own. It has features and shares in things that maybe a couple games might have similar to it, but it certainly brings things to the table that no other game does quite like it. There are games that share in some similarities, such as being in the same universe and share on some of the same features, that being MechWarrior. This is no shade on MechWarrior, they're just different games, they're on different levels. MechWarrior tends to be also a great game, but it's definitely more action driven, whereas Battletech is certainly heavier on the management and tactical side of things. It's a little bit more of a complex game, and in my opinion brings a little more to the table. Up until recently, I had been playing a lot of Mecha Break. If you don't know, this was a PvP mech game that was out in a closed beta here for a few days, and it was absolutely fantastic. I had a blast with the game. I never played anything like it, honestly. I was really sad when I heard that the closed beta was ended. But it sounds like the game is going to be releasing sometime next year, and you'll get to enjoy it as well. I highly recommend it. With that said, once that game and that beta closed, it left me a little bit of a void, right? I wanted to play other games like it, which is when I went ahead and purchased Armored Core 6. I had been on the fence for a long time about buying Armored Core 6. It always looked really cool to me and interesting, but again, Armored Core is more of an action-driven game, which there's nothing wrong with it, it's just a different genre of game, right? And so is Mecha Break, honestly. That's more PvP driven, whereas Armored Core 6 is not. It's just that they share in enough similarities to where it appealed to me, right? So I played Armored Core 6 and I had a great time with it. I'm not going to throw shade on a great game. I love the difficulty aspect of it. Graphically, it's fantastic. The idea behind it, being able to upgrade your mech and all that, it was really fun. But I played it for a few days and it left a void, and of course I came back to Battletech. Every time I play a different mech game, eventually I come back to Battletech. And honestly, I keep playing a lot of different games and wanting them to be Battletech, which is silly because at that point you should just play Battletech, right? It's just that the game has been around for quite some time. I think it's been around since 2018. And I'm not really tired of it, it's just that I want more of it, I want something different, and it brings to the table such unique features that you don't really find in other games, so much so that it's almost irreplaceable. Like I said, there's nothing out there quite like it. And Battletech might ruin other games for you because you will get used to having certain features in that game that other games just don't have. And I keep wanting to make other games Battletech and they're just not. And that's how I felt when I was playing Armored Core, and I'll explain to you exactly why. And again, this is not throwing shade on any other game or saying that, oh, the way that I like my games, this is the only way that games should be, or the features that this game has, all games should have. That's not the case. It's just a very specific niche of game with very specific features and systems that the game has that really no other game has. Some games share in some of those similarities, and they happen to also be games that I adore. I can think of RimWorld, I can think of XCOM, I can think of Battle Brothers, I can think of Darkest Dungeon, but really none of those games are Battletech. They're great in their own right, but they're not really Battletech. So before we get into the meat and potatoes here of the video and I explain to you why I love Battletech so much, what exactly is this game? So Battletech is a top-down, turn-based tactical game that shares on that mech genre. And Battletech is so great because it shares in features that a combination of different systems that really no other game has, and some games might have some of these systems but not really all of them. So you might be thinking, oh great, it's a turn-based game, it just so happens that it's mech. Is that what's unique about it? That's one of the things, and I am aware that there are tons of turn-based games out there. What's really incredible about this game is the systems that are combined behind it. Much like how I love games like I mentioned, RimWorld, Darkest Dungeon, XCOM, Battle Brothers, and whatnot, the thing that I like about these games is not just the combat, it's not just the missions and the playthrough, it's all the systems happening outside of battle as well, right? So what do I mean by that? It's an injury system. It's a heavy emphasis on economic and wealth administration. It's a repair system. It's a multiple ever-changing galaxy and a multiple ever-changing difficulty system as well. It's a replayability and sandbox aspect. It's that emphasis on heavy crew and system managements in general. And like I had said already, one of the main appeals to this game that I really like about it is that economic management side of things. So why is that the case exactly, right? Much like several of the games that I have mentioned, different missions that you do, they're not really story driven, right? You do have a campaign mode, which normally people play just once. The main appeal to this game is playing the quote unquote sandbox mode, which is going to be the career mode, which is infinitely replayable and has a lot of the features that I like about it. Campaign mode is fine. You should play it once, I feel like, at least, unless you want to jump straight into career mode. Nothing wrong with that too, because the career mode is really where the fun is at, in my opinion. So in this game, you are essentially the commander of a company of mercenaries that pilot different vehicles and mechs, right? And there's no real goal towards this game other than just not going bankrupt. Doing the missions, taking different contracts, making money, upgrading your crew, upgrading your mechs, buying new weapons, repairing them, being able to make payroll, which is that economic part of things that I mentioned, and honestly, just not losing, having all your characters die and your mechs blow up, or just not going bankrupt. So what I really like about this, we'll get into how the game works, the combat about and all that, but what I really like, and the first thing I mentioned, is that economic aspect to it. One of the threats in this game is money. It's that ever-looming threat of your company going bankrupt, right? Because you always have to make payroll. Everything that you have, all the mechs that you have, all the systems that are in place, the crew that you have, the engineers, the mechs themselves, everything that you're doing, the repairs, all of that costs a lot of money. And there's a specific period from time to time to the game, which is fairly frequent, where you essentially have to pay all those things, like your bills come due. And if you haven't done things in a way to prepare for that or prepare for the next 2 cycles of payroll, you go bankrupt and you lose the game. So there's not just the aspect of doing the missions, winning the fights, and everything else that I'm going to mention. A big component that I love about this is the economy. It's the fact that you're really managing the finances of this crew and this company as well. You're not just managing the individual soldiers and pilots. You're not just managing the repairs and the upgrades and the missions. You're trying to manage this whole company from not going bankrupt. And depending on how you're playing, it is really challenging. And if you add mods, which we'll talk about later, it makes it even more challenging. But that's the number one thing that is very unique and I love about this game and a few other games, is that economic aspect to it. Other games do share on this economy side of things, but they're not as harsh. Battletech is very harsh with the economy. A big component of the game is trying not to go bankrupt. So why exactly would you go bankrupt, right? So I mentioned this, right? So you have to pay your pilots, everybody that's driving the mech. You are the commander, so you are a physical character in the game that does pilot one of these mechs, but you have to hire other pilots to pilot your other robots, your other mechs, and you have to have reserves as well. I'll get into why. Not only that, the ship has a cost, right? The ship that holds everything together, electricity, the engineers, different things you might do for your crew to improve morale, storing the mechs themselves, your machines of war and all your weapons, all of that is going to cost money. On top of that, when you go into fights, when you take different contracts, your mechs, they break, which is something that I really like, is that missions are not self-contained. They're part of a bigger thing that you have going on. It's not like a story-driven game where you do the first mission, okay, stage 1 complete, stage 2 complete, stage 3 complete, and they're self-contained in their own right, kind of how Armored Core is, and you get a little bit more money and you go upgrading your robot, your character gets upgraded, and money's almost like a means to an end. It's not, right? So if you go into a fight and let's say one of your mechs, it gets blown up, great. Now you have to repair it and it's going to be more expensive than the contract was going to pay out. So that mission suddenly wasn't worth it and you're now in the red type of thing. Or even if something not as drastic as that happens, let's say your mech loses an arm or a weapon that they had on their shoulder gets blown up. Or the arm itself, you had a weapon on that. So you might be able to repair that component, the leg, the arm, the head, whatever it is, the heating system, the cooling system, which we'll talk about. But now that weapon is gone and you have to replace it with a different weapon or buy a new one. So there's this constant drag also on your finances. It's not just the management of quote unquote payroll. It's also the fact that repairs are super expensive. They're not symbolic. A repair of an important mech of yours or several can actually ruin a playthrough. You can actually lose the game because you cannot afford to repair them, or if you do repair them, the cost plus the time that is going to take to repair them could be detrimental. In the fact that when something is getting repaired, when a mech is getting repaired, it does take a certain amount of in-game days. Everything in this game is calculated with in-game time, right? When you take an action, this is going to take so many days. When you repair a mech, this is going to take so many days. And it might be that, say you have 200K 200K in currency, right? And your payroll is due in a week. But now your mech has blown up and that repair puts you on the red another 100K. So now you're 100K short of making payroll. And by the time that mech is repaired, you don't have enough firepower to take on another contract. So then you have to start juggling. Well, what do I do? You can sell some weapons, you can sell some of your mechs, you can try to take easier contracts with your worst mechs or less of them and try to still juggle that aspect. And it's that sense of like, it's not just the cost itself of the repair that will be detrimental, but the time it's going to take to get to another planet and be able to accept that contract. You just won't be able to pay your expenses and uphold your finances in time to be able to repair that mech. That one little thing that happened a month ago, that will ruin your entire playthrough type of thing. So you have to choose very carefully what you're sending into battle, the risks that you're taking. Every little thing you do has that risk management aspect to it as well, which I love. Because yes, you can't just take on the hardest mission. You can't just do whatever the hell you want, which to me strips away games from their, not just seriousness, but it makes you less engaged, where when you die, it doesn't matter. When things blow up, it doesn't matter. You just fix them. Every little thing you do really matters. And I really enjoy that risk management and financial management aspect of things, that not a lot of games have that. It's a very specific niche of people that seem to like that, and I happen to be one of them. What else can happen? Here's another issue too. Your pilots, they're living, breathing other individuals, right? So they're apart from the mech. So let's say your mech doesn't break, but you get shot a few times. Your pilot could get injured. Well, now what do? You don't have another pilot to replace him. Someone needs to pilot that mech. He's either dead because your characters can actually die and you have to hire new ones, and maybe that was a pilot that you had been training for a long time and now you just lost your best pilot. Or it could be that there just aren't any other pilots available now for you to hire, so you have to go to a planet and try to hire a new crew. So you have to keep reserve pilots as well, and the problem is that they become part of that payroll. So you have to have reserve pilots as well, and the problem is that those reserve pilots, they're also part of your payroll. So you also have to think and try to manage, well, how many people do I want to have in reserve in case some of them die or get hurt? There's all that aspect, it's the financial crew management side of things, the injury management where people can actually die. So you have that roguelite aspect to the game as well. Or they can get injured and it takes a while. Well, what do you do now? Because you have to take a contract within 2 weeks because that payroll is coming up again. Or you have an unexpected expense, so you need to be able to take another contract. Well, you don't have enough pilots, or the pilots are not good enough. So you got to spend more money now and hire a guy that's already at a higher level. So that's part of the aspect that I like as well. You're not just managing the company itself, the finances of the company. You're not just fixing the mechs in the sense that every shot, every little thing you take, the whole of the mech, the armor itself already needs to be replaced. Losing an arm, losing a weapon, all these things, and if it blows up, if the mech is completely destroyed, that's the worst thing that can happen because you got to repair the whole thing. It is super expensive. And then even weapons, right? The thing you need to consider too is the weight of your mechs and what they call tonnage in the game, right? So a small mech can't have a gigantic cannon attached to it because it can't carry as much weight. On that same token, even a bigger mech, you can't just buy every single weapon on the game and make it like this destruction machine where it has every single weapon. The more weapons you put on it, the heavier the mech will be, and it can only support a certain amount of weight. And you have to distribute that weight how you want it. Do you want several smaller weapons? Do you want one big weapon, two medium weapons? And there's different kinds of weapons. They have their own ammo. The ammo for the weapon has its own weight. Give you an example, like a laser beam. A laser beam is not going to have ammo. It's not going to have any weight. It's just a laser. But if you have rockets, there is like LRMs, ACs. They have different sizes of missiles. And not only do the missile launchers themselves have different weights, the ammo itself, just like real life, like bigger missiles weigh more. So you have to consider, can my mech support this weight? How much ammo should I bring? Because it's going to make things heavier. And on top of that, some mechs have better cooling systems than others installed, right? They have heat sinks. That's one thing you can install. Do you want to put more of that weight towards heat management because your mechs overheat? As they take damage, right? Some of the other mechs will attack you with flamethrowers and will overheat your mech, or some weapons that you have. Oftentimes, a big thing you have to manage in this game is the cooling system of your robot. So what does that mean? You fired a cannon twice, now your mech is overheating because you haven't had invested enough of that available weight and tonnage into a good heating system, right? So now the mech is constantly overheating, even though it has the best weapons out there. The heat management is very bad, and because it's overheating so much, the pilot's getting injured. The ammo, the rockets, they're blowing up because it's too hot. So even that you have to take into account as well. And that comes naturally for some mechs too. Like some mechs, they're very, I don't know, they're very tanky, or they're very strong. They can carry a lot of weight, but they have a really bad heating and cooling system. So yes, this mech is great, but it's constantly overheating. So do I want to sacrifice some of the amount of armor that I'm putting on that mech, or do I want to sacrifice some of the guns, like some of the sizes of the weapons, and put like medium or smaller weapons to be able to compensate and install some components that will make the cooling system better, or maybe something that's going to protect the pilot better? You can make each leg or arm or head or chest, torso part of your mech. You can dedicate more tonnage, more armor to that. So maybe you want to keep your pilot safe. You put a lot more armor there and makes it heavier in that sense, but your arms are not as heavy. Or let's say you have a mech that has a very expensive gun on your right arm. So you're probably going to want to invest a lot of armor on the right arm, give it extra armor there because you don't want to lose that weapon. So it's these little tiny minutia micromanagement things left and right everywhere around the game that make it so rich. If you're into management, if you're into roguelike aspects of game where your choices matter, the things you do matter, your finances matter, the decisions you make matter, the things you choose to invest, every little thing you do in this game actually matters. And that's something that the vast majority of games lack. And there's nothing really wrong with that necessarily, because I do consider myself in that sense kind of like a niche, right? Not everybody wants this. Some people just want to blow stuff up. They just want to go into a mission, follow a story, whatever it is. They like puzzles? They like, I don't know, the cinematic aspect of things. Whatever it is that you're into, that's fine. But this game scratches that management itch, and happens to be a theme in a genre that a lot of people love, including myself. That is mechs. It scratches all these different itches that really no other game out there does it quite like it. And that's why I say I keep wanting to turn other games into Battletech. Like I'll play Armored Core 6. Oh great, the robot either blows up and you reload the level and do it again, or there's nothing to it. You just get money, you upgrade your robot. Cool, that's kind of cool. It looks a little different. You can paint it. But there are no salaries. Your choices don't really matter. It's mostly just following a story, right? There is no upkeep that you need to consider. There's no chance of you like completely losing the game altogether. There's no chance of going bankrupt. You don't have to worry about repairs. You can't buy other mechs, and there's not all these different components and systems and management aspects to consider that Battletech does. And that's why I keep saying I keep wanting other games to be Battletech. And that's just unfair, because Battletech is a niche of game that has some systems that are just unique to it, or it borrows of several that other games have as well and puts them into one package, and it just makes it absolutely incredible. Now, other thing that's very good about the game is the mod scene. So I'm just going to very briefly touch on both of these. There are two main mods for this game that I consider the two best ones. They have a great community, great developers behind them, and that is Battletech Advanced 3060, often referred to as BTA, or Rogue Tech, often referred to as RT. I would recommend you first play the vanilla game before you introduce these systems that are more complicated, but these systems that the mods implement, not only do they add a lot more mechs and vehicles and whatnot to the game, they do rework some systems of the game and make it more challenging. So I do recommend first playing the vanilla, getting familiar with that, and once you start getting a little bit bored with the vanilla, then you go into the mods, because they add to their replayability a lot. So just briefly covering them, BTA is a great, fantastic mod. That is probably my favorite one. I really like the developer of BTA. His name is Bloody Doves. I've interacted with him a little bit on Discord and on Reddit. He's a great guy. The team behind, they're very proactive on Discord. If you don't understand how to install the mod, or you need help, or something isn't working, or you don't understand how something works, you just hit them up. Those guys are all really cool. And the mod is completely free, and of course you can always donate, but it's completely free. The nice thing about this mod, both of these mods, is pretty much you just validate the files on Steam, the integrity of the files, and then you download the launcher, and the launcher itself just updates and installs everything for you. It's very dummy proof. It does everything for you. Same thing with RogueTech. So they're easy to install. They take a while. They're big. They're heavy, but they're fairly easy to work on. And again, what BTA does is it expands on the vanilla game. It adds more mechs. It adds more systems to the game. And both of these mods do something that's cool, where it's a living, breathing galaxy. Something I didn't mention about Battletech is that these different contracts and missions that you're taking, you're not just doing them just because, you can, but mostly you're doing them for these different factions that are at war. And the more you succeed and do these different contracts for these different clans and factions, they become more friendly towards you and they pay you better. With the addition of these mods, you have to choose one or the other, but they add a living, breathing war that's going on around you, where you stop being the centerpiece of everything that's happening, and it's more like these wars and events and conflicts are happening around you, and you're just a component of that. So as you're playing the game, you do have influence. So if you're helping one specific faction do different missions and you're succeeding, they are, as you're playing, they're also trying to conquer these different sections of the galaxy and the whole galaxy itself, right? So there's a whole war in planets and systems being taken over by these different factions that are at war independent of you. It just so happens that you can also have some influence on those things because you can choose what faction to assist. And it's cool to see prices and things around you changing based on your actions, right? I think that that's awesome. Or it might be that your faction is losing, right? And now you've been doing all these missions against one faction before another faction, but that faction you were against is now dominating and you don't have a lot of available contracts that you can take from them. And now they're trying to hunt you down. And it just adds a lot to the game. But generally speaking, the mod BTA adds more to the vanilla experience. It builds on what you're already familiar with, and I think it's a little more fun in my opinion. Very briefly talking about RogueTech. RogueTech is similar in the sense that it adds a lot more to the game. The difference is RogueTech, BTA makes the game harder, but RogueTech definitely makes it hardcore. It makes the game significantly harder. What's also great about RogueTech is that it adds even more as far as mechs and different things. It adds more to the game, which is also fine and good. My problem with RogueTech is it's a little overly complicated. It seems like you have to have a PhD to understand that, how that mod works. And I've played a lot of it, so at this point I do, but it was certainly complicated to get into it. Another thing with RogueTech RT is that it runs very bad. It runs like crap, honestly. Even with a PC like mine, which is very, very strong, there is long loading screens. The mod doesn't run as well just because there's so much to it. It's just really heavy. That's all there is to it. It also adds so much to it, and it doesn't really expand on the vanilla. It completely reworks every system in the game. It's almost like you're playing a different game. So in that sense, it's really cool because when you get tired of Battletech, you can boot RogueTech, and it's almost like you're playing a different game that shares on the same skeleton of Battletech, but it's a completely reworked game, different systems that is a lot closer to the actual tabletop version of this game. With that said, in my opinion, and I don't mean to throw any shade whatsoever on the people that make the mod, because the mod is great and it's really fun. It's a little chaotic and a little overly complicated. BTA is certainly more approachable, and I tend to like it more. But to be honest with you, I switch around both mods. Depending on the day, I feel like playing one campaign with or one playthrough with one mod, and then next playthrough I'll switch to the other mod. Both mods are good. I would recommend, if you're going to play with one for the first time, get familiar with BTA. Once you've had enough of BTA, then go to RT because it's significantly more complex. And again, it changes the game entirely. It reworks everything. And with that said, I've already belabored a lot of these points, and I'll go back to the economy. And without beating up dead horse here and going on back to a point that I've already made, honestly, again, going back to the economy, the economic aspect of it, right? A thing that I like a lot in games is that sense of economic strife, that sense of survival, right? So when I play games like Skyrim, Fallout, and especially Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is another one of my favorites, I heavily mod those games to turn them into survival sims, right? I like making the economy more harsh. So like, for example, Skyrim, you have to eat, you have to sleep. I don't play without it being survival. You have to pay a certain amount to stay at an inn every night. I use mods to have taxes in the game. So if you have horses, depending if you have followers, properties, and things like that that you buy, I use property manager and things like that. You have to pay taxes. Every little thing that you do makes it so that you're more engaging with the sandbox aspect of the game, in the sense that you wake up, you don't necessarily want to go straight to the next quest. You have to eat, and you don't have any food stored, so you might want to go hunting first. You don't have a place to sleep. You might want to invest in buying a house. You might want to have a certain amount of money saved up to be able to rent an inn for a few days. You might invest in camping equipment. I like these components more than just following like this linear story quest by quest. So I like games like Battletech for that reason. And games that don't have that, I try my best to heavily mod them to where they become like this survival economy type sim. That's what I like. Not everyone likes that, right? But if that's something that you do like, and you like the roguelite aspect of the game, where your choices matter, things have consequences, everything that you do matters, pilots can get hurt, your machines, your robots can get hurt, you have to worry about the economy and administration of payroll and things like that. If you like this complexity of things and these different systems that the game has to offer, Battletech is certainly the game for you, and I could not recommend it enough. The only thing that I don't like so much about Battletech, and that's just a personal preference of mine, is everything about the game is early tech. If you're familiar with the genre, you know what they mean. The mechs, they're not Gundams, right? They're not late tech. They're not like anime mechs. They tend to lean more on that realism appeal, where the mechs are clunkier, they're slower, they're more like a robot versus like a Gundam or something from Evangelion, which is super mobile. It almost seems like a human itself, but it's actually a human piloting the mech. They're not as mobile, they're not as cool, they're a little clunkier, they're supposed to be a little bit more realistic. I tend to like the anime stuff a little bit more, but it's fine, it's great the way it is. I also wouldn't change that. I would just like to see other games that also adopt some of these systems, that make that management side for people like me that enjoy that be able to also enjoy the game. But again, that's all very subjective. That's all very like personal preference. And there's nothing wrong with games that don't have these components. That's just what I look in games. I look in games that have this because they add to an infinite amount of replayability. They add to the complexity of things. And it makes you feel like the things that you do always matter and there's consequences to your actions. That's what I like. That's what I look in games. That's why I recommend Battletech.